What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Hypnos channel. We have Formula One podcast number 2. So excited about this. The first podcast went so well. Thought we'd bring back the original cast. Shout out to Arjun in the bottom left corner. He is in Massachusetts, 1 a.m. there. How do you have the energy to bang this out for us, Arjun?
Bro, anything for the pod, man. This is gonna be a hype next 1 hour. Let's do this.
Anything for the pod. I love that. Like I said, we all had so much fun. Excited to bring another podcast previewing the Austrian Grand Prix. We're gonna jump into some race favorites, some of the track, what the Austrian track is gonna be like. Really cool track. It's got the Red Bull statue. Um, it's going to be tough for anyone to beat Max. But before we jump into any of that, just want to say thank you for watching. Subscribe. There's going to be more Formula One podcasts coming out. Super excited. And let's just jump right into it. Let's go to our boy in Massachusetts. Arjun, what can we expect in the Austrian Grand Prix? A race, for those who don't know, Max Verstappen won pretty handily for your team, Red Bull. Can we expect a repeat on Sunday?
Yep, I really think so. I think this track in particular suits Max's driving style, especially the amount of short, tight corners there are, and the fact that the Red Bull is a car that very much favors the long straights of Austria and has the downforce to be able to corner quickly. And I think we've seen even in the years of Mercedes dominance that Red Bull has always been a close second. So I really think that this year, with the power of our Honda engine and the superior aerodynamics, that Red Bull is going to be a strong favorite with both cars this year.
I think especially considering Max was like excited about the drive he had at Silverstone, considering the floor problem he had. There are a couple photos of him smiling with the broken floor piece. Not much he could do there, but we can expect like a similar Max Verstappen to come out on his home Grand Prix and just dominate. That being said, Audie, do we have any dark horse racers or teams that could have a chance to just kind of throw a wrench in the Red Bull plans on their home Grand Prix?
I would like to acknowledge that I'm biased, but Lando Norris does have a 2-year streak of the podium here. So I know he probably doesn't have the car that he's had in the past 2 years, but something about experience and comfortability with the track. I would predict and I would hope that maybe he can continue that streak and get another podium here.
For sure. Lando's been driving exceptionally well. Kami, should we look into Mercedes being a dark horse candidate with Lewis putting in a series of his better drives this year, especially at Silverstone? George Russell has been top 5 in at least George Russell's been scoring consistently in the past couple races. If he doesn't get out of the car to be an absolute sportsman, we can expect him to be a stud. Class act, by the way. But are Mercedes another team to watch in this Grand Prix?
I think so. I'd never count them out, even though they had a poor start to the season. We really didn't see the full potential of the Mercedes car in Silverstone. Obviously, we saw Lewis, but even in qualies, it was wet, so we couldn't see the dry race pace of the car. I think they've made major upgrades since the start of the season, and I think they should have a good chance. George, especially.
For sure. If we're looking at George and Lewis, who do we think is going to finish higher at this Grand Prix? Let's go to Arjun.
So I think we've seen that this year George has a lot more familiarity with the car. And I think indeed the Mercedes team is starting to set up the car to George's liking. However, I wouldn't count out Lewis in this scenario because he has won here many times before. I think he has one of the longest win streaks on this track. And it's a track that he's shown he can be very familiar with and even, lap some of the leaders sometimes. So despite their car not being up to par, I would expect Lewis to put up quite a bit of fight this weekend.
I definitely agree. I think it's a mistake in any race to count out Lewis. Just too good of a driver and too good of a history. Audie, can we expect your team and their second best driver to do anything outside of the realm he's been doing this season. Can Daniel Ricciardo turn around anything at all at this Grand Prix, or do we think it's just downhill this season? McLaren's got to cut their losses and put all their hopes on Lando.
I mean, I think best case scenario is bottom of the points. I'm talking 8 and lower. Unless there's some out of the ordinary circumstance, I don't see it happening because the car doesn't have the pace to be there in the top 5, top 6, where that's where Lando sort of differentiates himself a little bit, where that's where the talent comes in along with the car. Clearly, if not even lack of talent, it's just that Ricciardo isn't comfortable with the car. So I wouldn't have too much hope there. No.
So, Kami, if we look at Daniel Ricciardo, there's two things. We look at he's getting older. We know this. He was a very good driver with Red Bull, came up through the academy. Is the reason for his faults at McLaren the talent or the car, if you had to choose one?
I'd say the car for sure. Having said that, don't really think he's a particularly talented driver anymore. I think his prime in F1 is definitely past, but I mean, he's still good enough to be competing at the highest level. But yeah, it just seems as if the car isn't really suited for him. It hasn't been. He won in Monza last year, but it was a bit lucky. And yeah, this year is just even worse. So I think it's mainly the car, but he's also not a top tier driver anymore.
I agree. I think it's tough. I mean, if you bounce around those teams for too long, if you go from Red Bull to Alpine to McLaren, it's tough to get your footing. Arjun, do we think Daniel Ricciardo has a job on the grid next year with McLaren or any other team?
So that's a tough one. I know there was a famous quote by Zach Brown, the McLaren team principal, a few weeks ago, saying that Ricciardo hadn't met the team's expectations and that they were seriously considering future options. Now, this was no surprise to anyone who's been watching because his performance is frankly not much better than that of the Haas drivers. I really think that, Daniel Ricciardo is a driver who wants to be the number one seed at his team, who had the talent, but is just simply not able to match up to this new generation, Lando, George, Max. And despite him wanting to be that top dog at a team, I don't think he will get that chance again. So I see him going to the lower midfield and back teams and making some great social media content, but really never, just really fighting for the lower points, as Adi said, every weekend.
I'd like to, so to one point, to the McLaren part of it, McLaren as a team, up and coming, sort of on that trajectory, I think they need a little bit more from a second driver than the low teens. They need that second driver to be in the points, whether it's 7th or 8th, whatever. They need to be in the points consistently. That is not Daniel. So I would be surprised. I would be annoyed as a McLaren fan if he is back next year, because unfortunately he's being paid a lump sum of money that could be going into the car, which could be benefiting Lando, which could get him up with the Red Bulls, with the Ferraris. And as we've heard from Andreas Seidel, that the money is a big issue at McLaren this year, that they're having to hold back on their upgrades and whatnot. So no, I would be disappointed if he's back. That being said, somebody's going to have to fill the spot. And if that comes from one of the lower midfield teams, I think it's entirely possible that Daniel could go to one of them. I don't think he's out. He's certainly a little better than some of the guys at the bottom of the table, but again, agreed with Arjun. Don't think he should have a seat in as competitive of a car or a team like McLaren.
I agree. I think if you look at McLaren, obviously we talked about last episode, they were P4 in the Constructors Championship.
Still are right now as well. So P4 last year and P4 right now.
Yep. That's going to be difficult this year with Alpine, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah, because see, that's the issue, right? Ocon and Alonso have a good chance of being in the points both races.
That's the thing.
We've gotten a little lucky this year with between the two of them, plenty of DNFs and things like that, which are sort of negating them, and those are going up against just Daniel's 15th place finishes. So yeah, I don't even know if we're going to be able to keep up for, because it seems like they have the better car as well. So
Yeah, I agree. I think
unless Daniel steps it up.
Yeah, I think this year's P4 is definitely a step back from last year's P4, even if it's not in the
Agreed.
stand. The quality,
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
quality is a step back. I have a couple directions I want to go in. I think we can all agree Daniel Riccardo shouldn't be driving next year. Depends on how the contract goes out, but he might not be. I think what's really interesting is the F2 winner last week was Logan Sargent, who is an American driver. So is the first American driver F2 winner. Potentially, obviously, just if you're looking at replacements on the grid, new blood, it's going to come from F2. Could potentially be this American driver, but I want to talk about kind of the American presence. And I want to go to Kami. What has Drive to Survive done for the American audience in like getting people into Formula One? And what would it mean to back an F1 driver, like a young stud like Logan Sargent? What would that mean?
Drive to Survive has honestly been incredible for the sport of F1. I used to watch F1 when I was a little kid with my dad, and then I sort of phased out of it during the Mercedes domination. And then after this Drive to Survive, even just ourselves, we started talking about F1 because of this show. And I think we're just like everyone else in the nation who has sort of come across this hidden gem of a sport and has sort of fell in love with it. And I don't know, how that show was made, it was so smart, it was so exciting. I mean, you could look at races and think, oh, this is boring, especially those couple of years in F1 were quite boring, but they did a great job. Yeah, now we have two US races this year, Miami and Austin, and then Las Vegas next year. It's pretty impressive, yeah. And yeah, we have one US team, Haas, right? But an American driver would be something special.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the American influence, if you get an American driver in F1, that's going to be a complete game changer. Definitely got me and my family into it. And I think Drive to Survive has been great for the sport. Now, if we pivot towards the American team, Haas, Arjun, we talked about it last pod. We saw two top 10 finishes for them, which was a big moment to say the least for Haas. Is this a blip in the norm, or should we be beginning to expect this, especially at the Austrian Grand Prix?
I'm going to say that that was a stroke of luck last weekend, in large part due to the mayhem at the beginning of the race. I think it was quite fortunate for Kevin and Mick to be able to escape that. And from then on, it was just a question of managing the tires and finishing above the Williams cars. Now, most road cars and most, even the safety car could finish above the Williams cars. So I think that, it was pretty easy for Haas to maintain that position that weekend. This weekend, I think it will be tough just because we see so many cars are suited to the track. The Alpines, the McLarens, the Ferraris, the Red Bulls are all competing for those spots. So I don't see the Haas in even the top 15 this weekend.
So let's talk about that a little bit. Let's get into Alpine. What can we expect from like a wily veteran, a two-time championship winner like Fernando Alonso, and what can we expect from a relatively youngster and Esteban Ocon at the Austrian Grand Prix, Audi?
I think we're just gonna get more of the consistency from Alonso, because I've seen throughout this year when he races, when he has the car underneath him, he gets in the points. He clearly a talented driver, as he said. He's won 2 championships in the past. You don't just forget that. and they've given him a great car with great, astounding straight line speed. And there are plenty of straights on this track. I think there are only, I want to say 7 or 8 turns on this track, and a lot of straight. So that will play, as Arjun was saying, that'll play right into the hands of Alpine. With Ocon, you don't see as much consistency. You see his peaks like Hungary last year, and you also see a little rougher races. But again, as you said, this is a more mild, temperate track, if you will. It's not some wild street circuit like Monaco, but it's also not as open as Silverstone. So I think you can expect a good, I would feel confident in getting a good result from Alonso. And I think you can get a decent result from Ocon as well.
I agree. I want to talk about how Alpine does as a team in this Grand Prix, but really quick, Kami, rest of the way, do you want Ocon or Alonso rest of the way for the season?
I'm just rooting for Alonso at this point. Not a big Esteban Ocon guy, but I don't know. It's just been pretty impressive to see what Alonso's done in this second run at F1, coming out of retirement. And it just seems like he's really enjoying himself out there. And he's had some moments of genius, honestly. He got unlucky this year at Imola. He could have been on pole position. But yeah, I'm happy for him and I'm rooting for him to succeed.
I agree. Arjun, Audie mentioned it a little bit. How is the Alpine car going to fare on the track on Sunday? And prediction for Alpine or McLaren, who finishes number 4 rest of the season? Double question. Show me what you got.
Right. So to answer the first part of your question, if we just dive into the technical aspect a little bit, the Alpine car is very similar to the Red Bull. If you look at the side body and the way it's generating those aerodynamics, it's almost mirrors exactly how the Red Bull acts into corners. So I think we can see that same, as Audie was saying, straight line advantage, but then also speed from the exit of corners that is making the Red Bull so quick. So I see them as having more of a pace advantage than McLaren this weekend. That said, McLaren has an incredibly talented driver in Lando Norris, who has the ability to finish P4 and above. However, they also have an incredibly washed driver in the name of Daniel Riccardo, who isn't able to manage, even P14. So in the long game, I think that Alpine has the leg up because they have 2 drivers who can consistently finish, P7 to P9. And that is what pays off in the constructors. It's not the occasional P4, because you really need both drivers to bear the brunt of the constructors championship.
I agree. I want to talk about some overtake positions on the track, but really quickly, Audie, are Alonso and Ocon even in the realm of Norris as drivers? And for Ocon, similar age, do we think he'll get to the level Lando is as Ocon is a little bit younger than Alonso? Or is Norris just on another realm right now?
No, Ocon is not on the level of Lando. I don't think it's fair to compare Lando with Alonso. Well, I mean, everybody's all 20 of them are in
Alonso's not in his
F1.
prime anymore, which makes
They
it
can, yeah, they can all be compared head to head, and that would be exactly my thing. It's not fair to say a general statement Lando is better than Alonso. Lando is better than Alonso where he is right now. As you said, sort of on the decline out of his prime. With regard to Ocon gaining the skill of Lando and Alonso, I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, he has the car. He has the car to do it. He has the car to show it, but he's just not consistent. He's a little erratic in his performances. Whereas Lando, sort of time and time again, proves that he can do it even without the best of the cars.
I agree. Let's go to Kami and then we'll get into some race overtakes. Kami, do you think Ocon will retain his seat with Alpine for the next, let's say, 2 years? Do you think in 2 years he'll be an Alpine driver? And does he deserve to be an Alpine driver with the performances he's had this season?
Um, uh, I'm not sure. He definitely doesn't deserve a promotion. We'll see how good of a constructor Alpine turns out to be this year. But I don't know. He's solid. Alpine seems to have a good driver combo going on here. Ocon really looks up to Fernando, and they sort of get along really well. So maybe he gets better. He has a race win under his belt. So I guess he's better than Lando in that perspective. But yeah, I don't know. We'll see. I don't think he's anything special, but he's definitely not a bad driver.
I actually want to bring up, sorry, two things there. One that's kind of on the topic of Alpine, and one, I'm sorry, I'm going to derail the whole conversation. With regard to Alpine and the positions and the shifts, the one big thing sort of threw a wrench in their whole operation is Oscar Piastri, the man who won F2 last year. He is, I mean, highly coveted as an up and coming driver, given the fact that he won F3 and F2 as rookies in both seasons, back to back, obviously. The other two people who've done that in the recent past are Charles Leclerc and George Russell, who have both.
And Mick Schumacher too.
He won them both.
Yeah, back to back.
So who, barring Mick due to his situation at Haas, as we talked about last time, have flourished as drivers in F1. So and this goes into the weird technicalities of driver academies and driver contracts. He is in the Alpine Academy. So he's almost restricted in where he can go. He's sort of tied to Alpine, but it doesn't look like Alpine is going to have a seat this year or next year because they seem to be content with their driver lineup. So there have been sort of rumblings of him going to Williams and then Williams partnering with Alpine so he can remain within the network and then potentially sort of swoop one of those Alpine seats whenever it opens, whether it's Alonso's retirement or Ocon moving somewhere else. So that was one thing I just wanted to bring to our attention. But the other thing is, and this is off topic, but there has been a lot of talk about the Mercedes seat with Lewis Hamilton. We don't really know how many more years he's got left in the tank, presumably maybe one or two. So now the thing is, what happens with that seat? There are three people that generally come to mind. There is one, Nick DeVries, who is their Formula E driver. There's, I'm going to butcher this really badly. I don't know his first name, but Van der Noor, their other Formula E driver. And then there's Esteban Ocon. And this is because Toto is his manager.
Yeah.
So that becomes a super easy step up. Then there are long shots from outside. There was plenty of talk about Lando potentially taking that seat, which would be great narrative for Mercedes. Old Brit out, young Brit in. But that becomes a little tricky because of Lando's contract. God, I as a Lando fan, I have no freaking clue why he did that, but he is locked in for 5 years. There's definitely some way he can finagle his way out of that, but likelihood is low. So I was actually curious, Kami, by your take about him not being able to be promoted, which I totally agree with. But I wonder what that connection with Toto does for him. Can that, if not daddy's money like other people, can his connections give him one of the most coveted seats in F1?
I will say, watching Ocon's backstory, another inspiring backstory, similar to a lot of F1 drivers who didn't come from money, worked very hard for the spot he had with Force India. Many people believe him and Checo were not on good terms, but he did put in a good showing, which is why he was able to hang around and then come back to Formula One after a decent hiatus. So Ocon definitely deserves a lot of what he's had. Would he deserve a Mercedes seat, like Audie is saying? That might be, he would need the help of his manager, Toto Wolff. Arjun, if you had a prediction for Oscar Piastri, will he be on the grid next year for F1? And if so, what team?
So this is tough just because, as Audie mentioned earlier, the Alpine Academy contracts make it difficult for him to find a seat. Now, granted, there was another Alpine Academy driver who did end up finding a place this year, and that was Joe. Now, the fact that he's a pay driver aside, he was able to find a spot at Sauber and let go of his Alpine contract. But I think almost all of the driver pairings for next year are locked up. We have Alfa Romeo is set. Williams, we're not sure about Gotifi yet. So that's the one spot that I see Oscar Piastri swooping in. Now, that's difficult just because, Gotifi's dad owns the team. And so the famous daddy's cash theorem comes in here, where I don't think he would let his son lose his seat. So unfortunately, that's the dilemma we're faced with.
Hang on, I'm curious. Spitballing. Do you think he has a way into McLaren's second seat? I have no idea how that works. Is that possible? I'm curious about your opinion as how that works for McLaren. Do you think they would take on a rookie like that?
I think that's difficult just because McLaren have so many drivers in the pipeline. We see that with their connections to IndyCar, they have Colton Herta, Pato O'Ward,
another American.
Exactly.
Which could be
another
very
American.
Interesting.
Exactly. Yeah. So we have a few American drivers in the pipeline, as well as Logan Sargent. So I think
Logan Sargent's Williams, yeah.
Logan Sargent's Williams driver, yeah. So McLaren has two in IndyCar right now.
And who knows?
The driver academy.
That's a great point. Who knows? Because Zach Brown is also an American. Maybe this could be like F1's opportunity. You have the manager. You potentially have the driver.
Exactly. I like it. Match made in heaven.
I think it syncs up. I think if you get an American on the F1 grid, I mean, viewership, sales, everything skyrockets. I want to go to Kami here and talk about Williams a little bit. If you think of Oscar Piastri, if you think the Latifi spot is the only one available, we'll forget Daddy's money, for example, for a second here. But if you have a driver of that quality, Mick Schumacher brings up this to mind. Do you want to send them to a car like Williams and have them wallow away in filth and just get tarnished because their car is so bad? Is that good development for the driver, Kami?
That's a very good point, Luke. I don't know. It's a tough decision because obviously you've sort of scouted this guy from very young, and he's very talented. So you want to keep him ideally within your own team. But I don't know. He's not really having a seat in F1 is better than just being a reserve driver, what he's really doing right now. It could give him some experience for a couple years. And then when a seat does open up in Alpine, they can get him right back. And then maybe he can start performing at a high level there. But honestly, the kid deserves a seat. So I think he definitely should. Honestly, if it's a Gotifi seat, like it's a no-brainer. But yeah, I hope so.
Sorry.
Is he the Alpine reserve driver right now?
Yes.
Yes.
Go ahead, Audie. Go ahead.
So two sides to that argument. Obviously, the one, yes, that Kami brought in. We have a perfect case study in George Russell. He ate all the dust in the back of the pack, but he took his opportunities on Saturdays in qualies to prove himself, to get comfortable, and not be totally frazzled by all of F1. Then there's that issue. Yeah, we talked about this with Red Bull. You throw a rookie into McLaren, who's trying to, score points every race, get that P3 best of the rest. The pressure or could he just collapse like Albon and Gasly did when they were pushed into the spotlight a little too early? You don't know. So I think just for risk and like the risk and exposure for those big teams, it maybe doesn't make too much sense for them to take on the project kids, if you will. Like, and I'm thinking of like maybe another example where a team did McLaren with Lando in 2019, but at the same time, they were not in the position they are today. They were a lower midfield team who was sort of struggling. That's what opened the door to take a rookie in. But I don't know if it makes sense to put as highly coveted as the rookie is, it doesn't make sense in my mind to put them into a top team immediately.
I agree. Before we go into our little intermission, I will say George Russell took, I want to say, 3 seasons with Williams before he actually scored points. So there was a period of 2 years there where George was just bad. Like George, and it wasn't his fault, right? He was with the driver who got in the very bad car accident, like the up and coming Polish driver, I want to say.
Oh, Kubica.
Yeah. And then he got Latifi and they just stunk. Like you could tell George Russell was better than both of them, but it takes a while for them to rookies to get on par with the grid. We will be back really quickly, but short intermission and we'll see you in a bit. All right, guys, welcome back after that short intermission. Audie stepped on a cord and just it spammed the whole Zoom link. No, but welcome back. We really want to dive into the cars here for you guys. We've talked about the drivers in the first portion of this podcast. Drivers are absolutely crucial, but it'd be remiss if we didn't discuss the cars, the actual vehicles. So let's just jump right into it. Arjun, how important is car changes, car improvements from the beginning of the season to the end of the season? And what have we seen from Red Bull in regards to car upgrades from the start of the season to now that have allowed them to retain what is agreed to be the best car on the grid?
Mm-hmm. So to answer the first part of your question, it's often not the team that starts out with the best car that finishes with the best car. We see that whichever team can maintain the development resources and keep the money going to keep developing the car race after race has the leg up towards the end of the season. We saw that with Red Bull and Mercedes last year. It was basically a race to see whoever could bring the fastest upgrades week after week. And this year, I think we've seen some pretty radical update changes from Red Bull consistently race after race. Despite being hindered from the championship race last year, they've come out strong and are currently winning the development war against Ferrari. Now, some of the major changes we've been seeing on the Red Bull front are the car initially started off with these very blocky, large, wide side pods as we currently see on the Ferrari. And this was the car that was really fast in testing, not very reliable, but almost as fast as the Ferraris. And as the season has gone on, Red Bull has added more wing-like elements and indentations into the sides of their side pods that have brought them a lot more speed on the straights and consistent advantage into corners. And we're seeing that in a lot of tracks, they're actually outperforming Ferrari in areas that Ferrari was doing better at during testing. And so this is a clear indication that Red Bull is winning the development war this season. And I think that this is a sign that if they can continue this, they will have a strong lead for both the constructors and drivers championships this year.
Yeah, Kami, what Arjun is discussing comes down to obviously the drivers make recommendations, but this is really how good of an organization is your team. Red Bull, obviously, they've got a very famous team manager, but a very good organization beneath him as well to make these kind of improvements. How important is the team behind the drivers to make upgrades, to build the car in general? How important is that work that goes behind the scenes?
Yeah, super important. Sort of the brains behind the car and the design of the car at Red Bull is this guy called Adrian Newey, who is regarded as like the genius of design around the paddock. He's been at Red Bull since the Seb era, and is just year after year been creating just incredible cars for an energy drink company. It's pretty insane. So obviously they have a great team of engineers, great team principal, great drivers. Helmet Marco does something in the garage. I don't know what he does.
I hate Helmet. He's so annoying.
I think
He's
he's just like
hilarious.
emotional support for Max at this point. But yeah, no, the Red Bull team is a very solid team, and I think that is why they've had such continuous success these past few years. Obviously, they have sensational drivers coming up their academy, but the drivers can only do so much. At some point, the other factors, the other team members come into play.
I agree. Audie, teams are very important, but a lot of the times we find sometimes teams don't come up with their own car ideas. Maybe you could touch on what's been happening this season with Aston Martin, and maybe copying other cars on the grid. To be clear, this has not been an only this year thing. This is a trend in Formula One. Do you want to maybe touch on the history of that, Audie? Just the loosely
Yeah.
regulations, yeah.
So first thing, even before that, you think of how the development of a car works. So generally a team nearing on like the back half of the season, like a car like Haas last year, by the time they went into the summer break, they knew they were not competing for Constructors Championship. They were not competing for P5, P3. They were done. They, as you said, as Arjun was talking about, the importance of regular updates and upgrade packages race after race throughout the year, given that they did not think they were going to get out of P10, which they were right, they did like the equivalent of throwing the season. They stopped upgrading their 2021 car and they began spending and devoting all of their money to creating a new 2022 car. So generally the teams who are out of the running for the competitive spots in the Constructors Championship or the Drivers Championship, they will stop upgrading their car in the second half, last quarter of the year, and start spending that money on their new car. Then they're the teams that are in the running for P3, P2, and then the championship. And again, both the drivers and constructors, they spend their money all the way up until the last day of the 2021 season, as we saw with Mercedes and Red Bull last year. So they don't get as much time or money to develop the new cars. That being said, it's, as Luke said, there's a history to this, but it seems to be that it's still the better teams who have the right design, and it's the midfield teams that are going and copying the higher up teams, although they don't have as much time to develop it. As Kami said, they have the best car designers out there. So they're still able to pull it together. They're still able to make a very competitive car. So one example of this 2 years ago now, I think, this was between, again, Racing Point, which was then Aston Martin's predecessor. And funny enough, still under Mr. Lawrence Stroll's control. They had an incident with Mercedes. Mercedes had this brake duct technology, helped them slow down, but yet maintain speed through corners and just all around the track. It was great innovation. And Racing Point went and nearly copied it. Nearly copied it perfectly, and they were called out. Other teams noticed it, went to the FIA, and then they needed to sort of roll it back, make it a little different. Same team, Racing Point and Mercedes. There was one point, I believe it was the beginning of last season, where people literally called their car the pink Mercedes. That's how much it was similar to the championship winning Mercedes the year before. This year, Aston Martin, the same team, if you will, went and copied Red Bull's side pod design a little bit. The one that Arjun was referring to, that they developed a little bit further into the season. A little less bulky, a little bit more aerodynamic. But we also saw this with Williams. Their upgrade on Alex Albon's car last week was pretty similar to the Red Bull design. So that's sort of one branch. Then there's the other branch. There's the Ferrari and there's the Haas. Haas is known for having a little connection to Ferrari. They use the same engine, the same power unit. Their drivers' academies are also linked a little bit. And mainly through Mick Schumacher. And their car, especially at the beginning of the year, was stunning as compared to last year, if you will. It really caught people off guard. I remember seeing things at the beginning of the season where it was like, Mercedes, watch out, you're competing with Haas this year. That fell off a little bit, but it is mainly thought because Haas has gotten some of Ferrari's engineers and designers from past years, and their cars did have some similarities to the Ferrari. And as we know, the Ferrari is one of the top cars this year. And some of the team principals, namely Andreas Seidel, the McLaren team CEO, brought it up, and just concerns in general, referring to the sort of history as well as specifically to the Haas Ferrari case this year, that the FIA needs to be a little bit more cognizant of these similarities and these copying acts, where one team sort of hooks on to the success of another and tries to like get in closer.
Yeah.
So there's been a history to it. It is still going on, but I think people are more aware of it now.
Yeah. Arjun, I love that you brought up car upgrades. Definitely a massive part of this season. Audie mentioned complaints about copying car upgrades will go to the FIA. The FIA they have no drivers, they have no car, but they control so much in Formula One. They can decide who wins the championship, as we saw last year. What is the FIA?
Hot take.
Is it wrong though?
Deserve the championship.
I mean, it deserved, but it still decided it. I agree, Max deserved it, but let's not dive into that. We have so many more podcasts to go into that. But Arjun, can we give like a little overview on the FIA? Who runs it? Who's the director? These judgments are left to this mythical FIA.
Right. So the FIA is simultaneously the governing body, the safety defining regulatory body, and the regulatory and innovation defining body of Formula One. They sort of manage all of the actions of Formula One regarding the cars and the procedure around them. Now, it's so controversial because they are this monolithic entity that controls everything about Formula One. Their race director was Michael Massey last year. He was known for being extremely toothless and just frankly not up to the job of someone who needs to put their foot down and be assertive about decisions. And the FIA has gotten a lot of flack for walking back decisions and being very arbitrary on technical directives, so much so that it seems like they're favoring teams sometimes. We've seen in past years that they've explicitly banned technical innovations that Mercedes have created to try to get other cars to be at the caliber of Mercedes. And, as much as you want to see close racing, you never want to see a governing body intervene in the workings of innovation in Formula One. And that's why in recent years, it's become very controversial for their far-reaching influence in the sport. Now, I think they've made a lot of changes this year. One, the car is completely different. There's aerodynamic changes across the board, which are totally shaking up the order. And two, they've completely changed how the safety and regulatory agency works. So we see that in every race, they actually rotate the race director, and they have specialists for each track who help marshal the race and decide, when do safety cars come out? How are we awarding these penalties? And the hope is that this will make racing a lot more fair for, using racing directors who actually know the track better. And we can avoid a situation like Michael Massey in Abu Dhabi last year, where it was, depending on who you ask, either a godsend or something from hell. So I think that's a change that they've instituted this year. That's definitely improving the racing and making things a lot more fair.
Oh, Michael. If we want to talk about one of the teams involved in that big decision, Kami, what has Mercedes been up to this season? Maybe just touch on that a little bit. Things are looking up after the most recent performance. Should they be looking out for Mercedes?
Now definitely, yeah, but coming into the season, actually it was the same. Reigning constructors championships for the past 8 years. Obviously they're going to be the favorites to design the best car. And when the cars were first unveiled before testing, the Mercedes car stood out compared to all the other cars. And that was because they designed this very drastic like removal of the side pod, which basically brought it completely from the side of the car down and back. So it was sort of hidden. And there were some predictions at the time when this came out that the Mercedes was going to be 2-3 seconds faster than everyone else. And I don't know, I was just like depressed that day because I thought this domination was just continue over and over again. But then we saw them come into the first race and it was horrible for them. Lewis was like struggling to make Q2 and Q1 in qualifying, but they've sort of turned things around as the Germans typically do. And now the car is looking competitive. They've got great drivers in there. So yeah, it's looking good for them.
Looking good for Mercedes. Audie, do we think Mercedes will get back to their impeccable form that they were on 8 straight constructors championships? Or is this going to be a new era for Mercedes with Lewis potentially out the door, young blood and George Russell? Could there be a car shakeup, them needing to find their footing in a couple of years, or can we expect similar dominance from them in the coming years?
Now, if we're talking on a scale of like, can they do it another 8 years in a row? No. The talent is, there is plenty of talent in cars outside of them. As we're seeing in Red Bull, we're seeing in Ferrari, McLaren, hopefully in the next few years. So no, I don't think you can expect like another 8 straight years. You brought up a great point about Lewis. He only has so many more years left in the tank. So with him leaving, that's obviously going to be a big blow to Mercedes. I mean, to become constructors championships, right? Champions, they still need to win the races, right? It's all through the drivers. So if they don't, and my personal opinion, yeah, I think they do have the best driver pairing on the grid in terms of skill of the drivers and in a balanced way, not that all the talent with one and not the other. So to your question, no, I do not think that they can have a similar amount of dominance, because of Lewis leaving and potentially maybe not being as much of a threat to win races. And I say that with hesitance because I don't know who comes in and takes that other seat. They could be like George Russell and their car could be a little better, and who knows. But A, because of Lewis Hamilton, and B, just because of the, I guess, more diverse or like the more spread out talent among the grid now.
I agree. We've talked a lot about F2, up and coming drivers, some teams, some car designs, previewing the Austrian Grand Prix. Do we want to get into some potential overtakes on the track? What is unique about the Austrian Grand Prix track, Arjun, that makes it stand out a little bit from the other Grand Prix?
So one thing about the track is that it is an extremely quick track. It has a total of 11 corners, and like Audie said, only 7 or 8 of those are actually turns. The rest are things that you can go flat out on with the Formula One car. Now, this presents a few unique opportunities. Namely, there are 3 or 4 heavy braking zones that can be used for overtaking, and there's also, I believe, 2 DRS zones, drag reduction system zones. And for those who don't know, DRS or drag reduction system allows you to open your back wing so that you get a reduction, as the name suggests, a reduction in drag, which allows you to go significantly faster, almost 20 miles per hour faster on the straights. And this should allow a lot more overtaking in the Austrian Grand Prix. Now, I say this with a bit of hesitance because the Red Bull Ring also has lots of gravel traps right near these overtaking areas. So if you do end up going off track, you could end up beaching your car and compromising your race. So that could make people more hesitant to overtake at those spots. So we'll see.
Yeah, so there are like a few 90-degree turns. Turn 1 coming off the straight is a big 90-degree turn. And then even the next one, that's like even more angled, so it's tricky on an uphill. But there are 3 major overtaking zones. The first one being the second turn that I was just referring to. It is, I guess, even tighter than a 90-degree turn, and it is on an uphill. There's no gravel trap on the backside of it, making it a little bit more attractive to drivers. Then you go through a section with a few turns. There is one long left-hander where you can sort of get around the outside a little bit. And then finally, there's the last sort of curved right-hander into the straight, which then is a DRS zone. So someone could sort of make a lunge there, or if they can get good grip out of that corner, they have a great overtaking opportunity on the pit straight.
Great bit of detail there by Audie on potential overtake zones. I want to get back to the turn 1 that Audie mentioned. It is a sharp right hand 90-degree turn. Very unusual for the start of races. I want to go to Kami and discuss the start's going to be very important for the Austrian Grand Prix. But how important is the start for Formula One in general? We saw Silverstone where the start resulted in a mass crash that completely upended the race. Can you talk a little bit about the start, how the cars are lined up in twos? Qualifying gets you into the start. How important is the start for drivers?
Yeah, the start is the biggest like risk reward part of a race. Obviously, that's the moment where the cars are closest together. So if you get a good start off the line, if your tires are up to temperature, you can make a lot of overtakes consecutively. But then again, if you're willing to risk making those overtakes, you also have to accept the the fate of your car potentially crashing. Yeah, just for those who are new to F1, the cars are lined up sort of in a grid of two columns, I guess. And these, like, first pole position is separated from second position by about 8 meters. So it's significant, but also we see a lot of second overtaking first in F1. Max is notorious for that. He's done it multiple times to Charles, who seems to be on top. He gets pole and then Max overtakes him, and it's just his race from there. But yeah, for Austria specifically, turn 1 is interesting because it's very short going. The run to turn 1 is very short, so there's not much time to really get an overtake into place. And yeah, you just got to be careful and think about the rest of the season, think about the rest of the race, and just go from there.
I think one big thing that we're overlooking this weekend that has a lot to do with the fundamentals of F1. So generally, what an F1 weekend looks like is Friday you get free practice 1, free practice 2. Saturday you get free practice 3, and then after that you have qualifying. In qualifying, it's 3 different sections: Q1, Q2, Q3. Q1 has all the drivers, 15 minutes. 20 minutes, I think. You eliminate the bottom 5. Then those top 15 move into Q2. That's 15 minutes. Again, bottom 5 get eliminated. And then Q3, which is your last remaining 10 cars, 10 positions, 10 minutes, whatever that stack ranking is, that is the order that you go into the race. Same holds true for the 5 that get eliminated in Q1, Q2. That's the grid spot that they will start on during the race, and then obviously race on Sunday. This weekend is interesting. It happens maybe 2-3 times a year, and this is sort of a trial run for possibly a different weekend structure for Formula One in the future. So this is a sprint race weekend.
It's a sprint race.
It is a sprint race weekend. Yeah. So free practice is today the 8th. No. So there's going to be a practice tomorrow. Quali is tomorrow morning. There's a sprint race. So now you're just adding a middle step, right? You have your quali, right? Works the same way, Q1, Q2, Q3. Now, instead of those positions being your race position, it is your sprint race position. Now, what the sprint race is a 1/3 length race. Not quite sure how many laps it is this time, generally around like 20-25 laps. It's a race. It's a mini race. It's a 20 or so lap race. And you get, I think, first, second, and third get some championship points. Not a substantial amount, not near the actual race, but they get some. And rather than, this being the end, the sprint race being the end, whatever you finish in the sprint race then becomes your starting spot for the big race on Sunday. So this is actually very exciting. I personally love these weekends because it's more racing. So
I if you look at the faces of me and then Arjun and then Kami, this is all news to us, I think. So, and I think we're all very excited because it means more racing, like Adi said. And I don't know which one of you said it, but someone said podcast number 3 after the sprint race, potentially. So someone murmured it into the mic, potentially. I don't know. Podcast number 3, a little sprint race review, and then preview the Grand Prix. I don't know. I love it. I just want to say it is 2:20 for Arjun in the AM. Absolute stud. We're in the last segment, last couple minutes. Let's bang this out. Arjun, I have 2 questions for you. Then we're going to go to Kami, Adi, and wrap this up. Arjun, who are the best starters on the grid? Adi mentioned Max is stellar. Who are the best starters on the grid? And then give me your sprint race prediction winner. Your top 3. Give me your sprint race top 3. Who's the best starter?
I have an idea. Pole, sprint race.
Okay. Who's the best starter on the Grand Prix on the circuit? And then maybe like a dark horse starter. I don't know. And then pole, sprint race winner.
Okay, so best starter overall, hands down, Max Verstappen. Amazing overtaker. Can start P2, P3. He'll be in P1 by the first or second corner, guaranteed. Dark horse starter is actually Fernando Alonso. A lot of drivers fear Fernando starting close to them. He has extremely quick reaction time. I think he is milliseconds or tenths of seconds faster than other drivers on the grid. So he gets a really quick jump right off the line.
Mass amount in the race. Yeah.
Yeah, especially, at the beginning. So that would be starters. Now, for pole position, I'd have to say Charles Leclerc. Max is an amazing qualifier, but Charles has just shown that he can take qualifying to a whole different level this season and really put it together when it matters. So I think Charles is going to start P1 for qualifying or for the sprint race. Now, during the sprint race, this is where things get interesting. If Charles starts P1, Max is for sure going to overtake him, right? Max has far superior racecraft. We've seen it this season. Max will consistently overtake Charles right off the line. Carlos Sainz, you know my opinions on him. You know, going down, he's probably gonna DNF. Don't like that guy.
And let's say Charles is a great racer. Max is another level. Go ahead, Arjun.
Yep. So Max, I think, is getting into P1. So I think we can comfortably say that Max Verstappen is going to be starting P1 for the Austrian Grand Prix. And my winner prediction, I'd have to say, with the strength of the Honda engine this weekend, one thing that we didn't mention is that the Austrian Grand Prix is at altitude. It's at about 2,000 or 3,000 feet. And the Honda engine actually works better than the Ferrari engine at altitude due to the turbocharger. So all of this is to say that Red Bull have a pace advantage as well as a driver talent advantage this race, and that will lead to a Max Verstappen victory.
Look at the gems by Arjun at 2:30 a.m. in the morning. Just dropping gems.
Thank you.
Kami, it's beautiful, Arjun. I love it. It's just beautiful. Kami, pole,
Thank you, bro.
sprint race, official race.
All three Max.
All three.
Yeah. But I could see a dark horse for me is Checo. And you might not say it, you might be like, it's not a dark horse. He's in the top one. Yeah, but I could see him pulling out the race win, honestly. Something he got unlucky last year. He got a couple of penalties that really hindered his race. But I don't know. Checo's on a different level this year. But Max, I believe in him all the way.
Audie followed up with the same three, and then I'm gonna go because obviously I'm gonna win the predictions. We will look back at this on another podcast when we review the Austrian Grand Prix. Audie, you're up. Pole, quali or sprint race, final race.
Okay, pole. Charles, he puts on a masterclass in just pure pace. So does Max, but as of late, it just seems to be Charles who's still pulling through. So I'm gonna go with Charles there. Sprint race, Max is gonna get ahead. I would look for Lewis Hamilton. He has a knack for these sprint races. You see him do it in the race as well. Maybe doesn't have the fastest car, but has the racecraft. He does it. So I would see him as a riser. I would also, I'm biased, see maybe Lando as a little bit of a riser through the sprint race. Again, doesn't have the quality pace that the Ferrari and the Red Bull have. Racecraft can make up for some of it. And race, I think it's also going to be Verstappen. So Leclerc, Verstappen.
For me, quali, give me Charles Leclerc. I think, like everyone said, great poles. I see him getting on pole for the sprint race. I see Max Verstappen following Arjun's trend, overtaking him and winning the sprint race. For my race winner, in the last 5 Red Bull races, Red Bull has had 4 podiums, McLaren has had 2, Ferrari has 2, and Mercedes has had 7. Give me Lewis Hamilton to win the race. We're going to come back and we're going to look at this prediction and we're going to say, damn, Luke was a genius. George Russell in the top 5, Hamilton on the top spot in the podium. We're going to come back and we're going to see it. Luke is a freaking genius. All I'm saying is Mercedes has dominated in the Red Bull ring the last 5 races. Just something to think about. It's been an absolute pleasure, guys. I heard someone say podcast number 3 after the sprint race. Might have been Arjun, might have been Kami, might have been Audie. I don't know. You will definitely see us soon. We have a pleasure doing this. Make sure to subscribe. Thank you guys so much. Any final words from anyone?
Go, Max.
Go, Matt. I mean, it's the Red Bull ring, you know? I see Mercedes goes in there and they rile up the crowd. The crowd just gets angry. It's been so fun. We will see you guys soon. Thank you so much. Special shout out.
Maybe Maybe they'll get the Max Verstappen treatment. Maybe Lewis will get some of the Max Verstappen treatment. All the booze in Silverstone for absolutely no reason.
I don't know.
Amazing.
I think Lewis Hamilton comes out with a victory. That's he'll be drinking from a shoe by the time Sunday ends. It's been a pleasure. Let's get Arjun to bed. We will see you guys for podcast number 3. Let us know if you have any podcast name recommendations as well in the comments. All right. See you, boys.
All right.
Peace.